at BBC News Broadcasting House at 3:30, on air at 5, off air at 9, here at 9:30. Whew. So we've got the discussion of faith under pressure, and Paul has already introduced to you the panel. One thing that I tend to do when I do panels is I get you guys involved much sooner rather than recommended. That's just to make sure you're not dropping off, falling asleep, or Facebooking your buddies, but you're actually engaged with us. And also, I just think it's much more productive for you. You're likely to get more of what you want from the discussion. So we are going to involve you quite soon. So when you've got your questions and your thoughts, your comments, just make that clear, stick your hand up. Have we got people with microphones who are going to do that, or are we just shouting? Lady at the back, fantastic. So she will pass you the microphone, and do tell us who you are, where you're from, who you work for, and then what your question is or your comment is. So don't hold back. We really look forward to that. So as Paul has already said, we're talking about faith under pressure, and really the industry that we work in and the impact it has on our faith, or the impact we have because of our faith. Something that I would imagine anyone who is in a position of faith would think about or discuss or grapple with during their career. So we have the three fantastic panelists, as already mentioned. So I'm just going to go down the line. Helen, if I start with you. So Helen is Deputy Head of Travel at The Independent and at the Evening Standard. So Helen, if you tell us a bit about your career and also your faith, how the two fit together or don't, as the case may be, and any challenges you've come across.
Sure. So mine's kind of interesting because I feel like I became a journalist sort of because of my faith, or tied into that, because I, when I was 23, had a sort of, not really dramatic, but quite a quick conversion experience, having been a lapsed Catholic. And started going back to church. And one of the first people I met at church was actually now a really good friend of mine, but she edited a Christian magazine and found out that I liked writing, and was very encouraging, and said, oh, you can write some stuff for us, you can do some subbing for us. And then she said, oh, you know what, you should just be a journalist, you should do the NCTJ qualification, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, okay. And basically it gave me this validation to do it, because someone else was saying, you should do this. So I did, and retrained. And so I always feel like without going to that church, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. It's as simple as that. It was really, integral to my journey. And then my first job was editing a business magazine for entrepreneurs, which if you knew me, you'd think, what? Because I don't know anything about business or entrepreneurs. But so that was interesting.
You did a very good interview.
I do, yeah. I think they were desperate.
Fake news.
Fake news, yeah. So it was a really interesting first job, because there was just me creating the whole magazine, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, okay, really keen. And after about a year of that, I thought, I don't love this, to be honest. And saw a job advertised it was for a very lowly position, like a junior sub, for Ski and Snowboard magazine. And I thought, oh, I really love skiing. I should just go for that and take a massive pay cut, and, let's do that. And I did, and it just happened to be being bought by The Telegraph. So as I joined The Telegraph, not this kind of individual magazine. And it's one of those things where the timing was really lucky, to be honest, because I don't know if The Telegraph would ever have hired me. Probably not. But I snuck in through the magazine back door, and then worked my way up there to online editor for Ski and Snowboard. Then thought, what next? This is quite niche. I've written a lot about new ski lifts. I'm ready for more. So I joined The Express as a travel reporter for about 4 months, and then left there in April of this year to join The Independent as the Deputy Head of Travel. So everything's kind of followed on, but for me in a very unplanned, haphazard way, which joyfully has resulted in something I love doing. But it hasn't felt particularly like, this is what I'm going to do, which is probably irritating for people that are desperate to be a travel journalist, because I'm just sort of, I just landed up here. But I do love it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, of
Anyone from
course.
the Express here? Reveal yourself. No.
A few.
What was it like being at the Express?
It was, it was really
lots of
tough.
Scary stories
It was tough.
for young women at the Express.
Do you know what? It wasn't scary in that sense. Maybe I'm not quite young enough. I don't know. But that was fine. I found it really challenging because it is the polar opposite of pretty much everything I believe in and stand for. And it was very difficult kind of working in that environment. But I remember telling a friend of mine, is this wrong? Is it wrong that I'm doing this when I feel like so much of what they put out there is not good for the world? And they said something interesting. They said, you know what, if you go to The Guardian or something, they don't need another person like you. They have enough people that think the way that you think. If you go somewhere like The Express, there's an important function in being who you are as a Christian in an environment that is fundamentally different to that. And I think, I think she was right, actually. Not that I went round converting people.
Could you be open about your faith at the Express?
I always make sure that I am, to be honest, as much as I can be. If someone says, what did you do at the weekend? I will say, oh, I was doing music at church with my ukulele, which I do. Because I think I just try and get it out there as much as part of me doesn't want to. I think it's really important because that's how you can, in my mind, that's how you can subtly change people's ideas about what being a Christian is and what Christians are like. They have to know you are a Christian first, though. That's kind of fundamental.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Good start. So, Darren, you work on 5 Live Daily with Adrian Chiles. Now, I know Adrian because, of course, he was with the BBC. Still is with the BBC because that's BBC 5 Live. Sorry, he went to ITV, but anyway, whatever. And tell us a bit about you and your journey.
So, I mean, in a sense, I feel a little bit like the fraud in the room because I am not Christian. I had a kind of, a stereotypical upbringing. We went to church Christmas and Easter, and then in my 6th form, I became much more involved and became much more active in my Christianity, and began going to church every week, got baptised at the age of 18, and at school I'd always studied sort of, one of my A-levels was philosophy, so I'd always looked at the kind of the arguments for and against and the problems that Christianity has, the problems of evil and things like that. I even went to the extent that I read The Brothers Karamazov, which is a very long book. And I always managed to get around or accept, as a 18 to probably about kind of 22, 23, to get past the idea of evil in a world with an all-loving God and things. But then when I became a journalist, I suppose the kind of things that I began seeing and reporting on changed me and changed what I thought. And I found it much, much more difficult to square that circle. One of the first things, well, it wasn't one of the first things I did, but one of the things I did as a local journalist in the West Midlands was there was a guy called Ken Bigley, who you might remember. He was an aid worker who went out to Iraq in the early 2000s, and he was captured. I mean, it was before IS existed, but he was captured and he was beheaded.
It's terrible.
And one of my jobs that I was sort of assigned to do, because we got these reports, and because I was in local radio, he was a local guy to where I was in local radio, and effectively I had to spend a day looking at extremist videos, trying to find out whether this guy was dead or not. And I mean, for everyone that is a challenge. For me, that changed me in a certain way, I suppose.
And that wasn't that long ago, was it?
It was 2000, probably about 2005, 2004.
And that's when you were starting in your career?
That was within the first or second year of my career. I mean, lots of my beliefs and thoughts now come from my 4-year-old, because if you can't explain something to your 4-year-old, then you have a bit of a problem. So we were in the car a couple of weeks ago. I was driving him to swimming, and I don't know what I've done as a parent, but he's got some kind of fascination with death. So he said, Daddy, why do some people die? Okay, you're 4. I blustered a little bit, and then I came up with quite a good answer. Which, I said, well, because if we all lived forever, the Earth would be really, really busy, and we wouldn't all fit. And plus, by the end, you get a bit tired, and so you want to rest. And I thought that was quite a good answer to give to a 4-year-old. But he shook his head and said, no, Daddy, you don't understand. Why do some people die and others don't? And that I cannot square. It happened because at the time we were listening to, he's an odd 4-year-old, so his favourite artist is David Bowie. And so that's why the death conversation...
Is that your influence?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
but that's why the death conversation come up.
It's just David Bowie on the radio all the time.
Explaining to a 4-year-old why 60-odd-year-old David Bowie is dead and Grandpa is alive, and why does Grandpa deserve it more than... And that's the thing, I couldn't answer that to my child, and so that kind of stopped me.
Okay.
I know Paul, who gave the introduction, he said I would have to leave this room pretty quickly to avoid 150 Christians praying for me at the end. So
They're doing it now.
Okay. Right.
Yes. Did you not check the side room with the intercessors in it? Okay, David. Yeah. Now, you're the one non-journalist on the panel. Actor, the glamorous world of acting, Interstellar, Cloud Atlas, Containment, long list. Fantastic career, wouldn't you say? In your business, which is extremely tough.
Thank you.
Yeah, take the compliment. You might be the only one.
No, absolutely. I'm still on that journey, and I was thinking, because I really wanted to get into the questions. A big part of why I was intrigued to come is because often we don't have someone coming with the honesty that you're coming with, and so I was interested in being part of that discussion. So I'd love to race into that as quickly as possible. Yes.
So speedy response then.
Speedy response. I would share a story from a job. I was recently in South Africa in Cape Town, and the thing about Cape Town is everyone goes, "Isn't it beautiful? Look how beautiful this place is. Isn't it wonderful?" And I'm like, it's funny. Beautiful is an interesting word, because the poverty that I'm seeing around me and where I'm living is not just financial. It's segregated by race. And people are going, "Isn't it beautiful?" And there are kids begging, and those kids all look like me. Your kids aren't doing that, but they look like me. Isn't it beautiful? Very strange. Go to Robben Island. In the middle of Robben Island, it's a beautiful building. It's a church. What were they doing there? So I hear you. What were they doing when this was going on? Justifying it. Wow. In that name? How does that happen? So for me, we're only just slightly, there's a slight difference. I found that I needed to find somewhere out there where those boundaries were falling, or people were attempting for them to fall. And the only place I found that was a church. And the words that were coming out, and so people that were going, "Look, this isn't beautiful. but where someone described it as a kairos moment, which I didn't know what that meant, but apparently it's the moment before something great can happen, or it can go the other way. So the most like that would probably be the World Cup victory. The South African rugby team World Cup victory. Think about it.
I remember that.
Mandela's just come out. We've been allowed back into international sport, and we're on top of the world. And the feeling, the euphoria was like, this must be the best place in the world.
Yeah.
And so one of my good friends out there was saying, I believe we're in that moment. And she was optimistic about how they move forward. And I'm interested in that. I'm going to stop there because
just quickly though,
yes, no, go on.
Are you from a Christian home? Is that how you were brought up, or is it something you found as an adult?
Yeah, so I'm from a Christian home, and I hope my parents won't mind me saying this, but when I was young, my parents were on the brink of divorce, and I later found out that actually the trip we had to Ghana, where I was crying, going, why can't Daddy come with us? My mum was travelling to Ghana to actually separate. So what would happen is she would go with her family to my dad's family and go, look, I can't do this anymore. And she had a conversation with her twin brother. And ironically, he's been divorced about 4 times, but he said to her, I don't think Jesus likes divorce. And I don't think that you should go through with this. She was like, what is it about? Because they'd grown up in church, and she's like, how do you have that relationship? And all of this, I'm finding out retrospectively. All I know is that from that moment, something changed in my house when we got back. There was a harmony and a togetherness there, which almost nullified the first 4 or 5 years of my life, to the point where other family members would come to our house for marriage counselling, for chats with my parents. And so seeing that felt like, that's interesting. And I noticed we started going to church, and that, I've had my issues with it. But for me, that's my place that I go to when sometimes I wrestle with God, we have, and hopefully we'll come on to one of those examples later, but so that's where my faith is, and that's what it's built.
All right. So just quickly about me, as Paul said in his introduction, Sally's been around for a very long time. I'm older than I look because I've been in the BBC makeup department since 4 a.m. So I've been a journalist for over 20 odd years, and it's all been business and finance, and that's purely because how I fell into that, a bit like Helen, although she escaped and went snowboarding, and I never managed to escape, so I'm still doing it. And I became a Christian when I was 15, not from a Christian home as such, but my eldest sister went away to uni and got radically saved, came back, Bible bash, and I was the weak sister that gave in. And I've been a Christian ever since. And I have to say, without my faith, I just wouldn't be the person I am today. Just to say the point that Darren was making about the conversation with his 4-year-old son about death, I've got 3 boys, 12, 10 and 6, and my lovely husband died in June this year of cancer. So it's something we've talked about in our household a lot lately, and the fantastic thing about the conversation is the good news that because of Jesus on the cross, he's got a brand new body and he's still going and he's in heaven with an eternal life. And so as far as my boys are concerned, death doesn't exist. It's just our physical body has stopped working for whatever reason, and we're carrying on in another form, partying in heaven with Jesus, Moses, Noah, Granny and Grandpa and all the other people we know who are up there. And my 6-year-old son, if ever I say at home, oh, when Daddy died, Mummy, Daddy's not died. And it's amazing. And, teachers are sort of talking to me in the playground going, oh, Tom's saying to us that Daddy's at home, and they're concerned that he's having some weird hallucinatory moment. I'm like, no, heaven is home. So that's where Daddy is. Daddy's home, and we will get there when it's our time. But without my faith and my walk and my close relationship with Jesus, I would be a wreck, and I wouldn't have had the amazing marriage we had. My husband's also a Christian, and we met both at Bloomberg Television, where I was working some years ago. He was head of post-production. I was a reporter. I went and got a story, sat in his edit suite. You can imagine. We got married. So 3 kids later. But he's from Durban, South Africa, and that moment you mentioned, he was in Durban when South Africa won the World Cup, and it was a Kairos moment. I mean, he said that was amazing. So I'm going to throw it to the floor because, as David has said, he wants to really get stuck in, and we want to talk about what you want to talk about. And feel free to ask us any questions and challenge us, or share your story, your comment, your challenge. So let's hear what you want to know, or what you want to ask, or what you would like to say. Don't be shy. But don't hum it, we won't understand. So have we got anyone with a question to start with, to get the ball rolling? I can't believe there's no questions. Two. So let's start with this gentleman. So remember, if you could tell me who you are, where you're from, and then what your question is, to whom.
Okay. So I'm going to cross a line here, because my name's Tim Lavelle. I work on 5 Live. I work with Darren. And so... and so I'm going to ask the question. It's sort of slightly for Darren. I don't make you feel awkward at all. But
Darren.
But I think it kind of gets. I think it gets the heart of what we've been talking about, which is that what's interesting is that, so I'm a Christian, and it feels to me like I see all the injustice in the world, and I see all the bad stuff that we report on, and I think it shows not to me that my faith is broken, but it shows to me that actually the world is broken. That's a bit of a cliche, as in politicians can't fix it. That's the whole point. They can't fix it. And the only way you can kind of cling on and hope that things will get better is by believing that you know there is that with faith things are better, and that you know there's a redemption and so on. And actually, and there's a sort of second point, which is actually the interesting point about how a lot of people doing good in the world are Christians, are people of faith. But that's a kind of minor point. What I really wanted to ask about, what the panel think about, when you see the difficult things we have to report on, does it make it easy to be a Christian or harder? That's my point.
Shall I start? And then, because one thing I didn't say is, so I'm on air at 5 o'clock, and there's a programme on BBC One. It's 5 to 6 o'clock, and it's BBC World News and Business. So I do the business. But from the 31st of October, it'll be my programme. So it'll be me doing everything. But we cover all, on BBC World, as you probably know, we cover the minutiae in more detail, all the stuff that you've been talking about, like the beheading of the UK charity worker, and the latest thing from Raqqa, and, you know, chemical attack on Syrians and all this stuff. And sometimes it's really hard, that hour, because we don't do much domestic news. And the domestic news is a lot easier to stomach quite often than the international news. You know, what's going on with the Rohingya Muslims and that kind of stuff. And so my perspective on that is very much that I am aware that what we're reporting and what we're telling the world about how the world is the news that we're getting in at the BBC from various sources. But I'm also conscious, and I know, of fantastic things going on in the same places where Christians are doing stuff and having an influence and actually risking their lives. And yet we don't report on it normally because, for example, if we were to, they would be really at risk. So I know, for example, this charity called Pioneer, who are based near High Wycombe, which is where I live. So a lot of them are in my church, and I could never, ever have them as a guest on my programme or do a live interview with them because they just cannot reveal who they are or what they're doing. And some of them are actually in Raqqa right now with people who fled from Islamic State control. And it's quite incredible what they have to tell us and the stories they're telling us and what God is doing in that situation. So for me personally, you know, the picture is grim, there's no doubt about that, and the world is broken, as you say, but there's a lot of people out there who are Christians, and there's a lot of people who are not Christians, frankly. They're just amazing charity workers who have a really good sense of wanting to make the world a better place, who are making a massive difference and doing a lot of good. And if you watch Christian media, or you hear in your church, or you go to Christian events, you hear more about that stuff. And that's really encouraging and brings hope. So I have that in my mind. And also I do a lot of prayer about this stuff. I pray a lot about this stuff. Anybody else want to respond? Go on, Helen.
I was just going to say that I'm a bit shielded because working in travel, I obviously don't have to, I'm not the one writing those stories, but there is a kind of osmosis in a newsroom where the atmosphere absolutely permeates, and you know as soon as something bad has gone down, and there's TVs everywhere and they turn the sound up and you hear the same, you know, sound bit of people screaming over and over again all day, and you're finishing. I think what is really difficult in digital media is because there's such a focus on the quantitative rather than qualitative. So you get rewarded for the number of people that saw a story, not for how good the story was. There's definitely sometimes a sense of detachment from people about what they're seeing, more than just, well, I have to detach myself to write this story. I've heard editors say things like about Hurricane Irma, oh, apparently it's going to finish by this date. That's really disappointing. I was like, oh my goodness, can you hear yourself? You're literally talking about something that's killing people, and you're unhappy it's going to finish because you won't get so many clicks because you're pumping out 10 stories a day on this thing. And things like that are they're really tough because you just want to stand up and go, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? But I think you're right. I think, you know, being prayerful about it, reminding yourself what is important, not getting sucked into that mindset is what I try and do. It's very easy to sort of slowly slide into that kind of, this is what motivates me, just the numbers. I don't care about the situation here. And you have to be very firm about, no, I'm not part of this. I am to some extent standing outside of it.
David?
Yeah, quick story. A lot of my things are going to be stories, I'm sorry, but I think it works. So I was on a film set with an A-list Hollywood actress. No.
Woman.
A woman.
Are you allowed to name her?
No, I don't think I'm going to, actually.
Okay.
And the reason I say that, as well as the benefit of name dropping or saying I've worked with A-list, is that there is a dynamic that happens, right? So you're on a set and you're there, and then the A-listers come in and they do their work, and everything they say is funny, everything they do is great, right? So we're about to do a take, and she mumbles this line, and she goes, oh my gosh, have you seen the Book of Mormon? And I went, no, I haven't seen it. She said, oh, you would love it. There's this hilarious line where they sing this sentence, and it basically means, F you, God. And my face must have changed a little bit. And then they were like, okay, rolling and action. And so I'm doing this scene, and I just, that Saturday before, attended a men's group out in LA, and we had got into this debate about, you know, whether we should be really strict and really following the Bible or not, or you know, the Old Testament versus the New Testament. And one guy stood up and said, do you know what, guys? God's a big boy. He can deal with it himself. He doesn't need us to defend him.
That's right.
So I was like, doing my scene, going, okay, I'm not going to say anything unless you put something in my head to say or to do. I'm just going to not say anything. They were like, cut. She went, I'm so sorry, I feel like I offended you back then. I was like, no. And then this answer came, which was, it's interesting to me that in the West, we write a musical, and this, apparently the people singing this is an African lady on a famine, a barren land, and she's singing this. It's so interesting to me that we write a musical like that when there is enough food that we throw away every day to feed the hungry. Yet we write that musical and we make all the profits from it, and we go, aren't we amazing human beings? And what's God doing about it? But we're singing that song. So the way that I find I deal with it, to answer your question, I find so many times in the minutiae of it, you find that human beings, what are we doing to each other? can solve a lot of this. As a parent, I too see my relationship with God a lot through my kids. So my son, South Africa was difficult. We can't walk past anyone without, he doesn't get it. He's like, how can we be going to eat and this guy's not eating? So we go to the restaurant, we order our food, then we come back out, we take a meal for this person. We had to drive with food in the car.
That's great.
Like, he was like, everyone, we're just gonna give Chris, we're just gonna. So there's something in that that I think when we get to that point where you can't find the humans that are at fault, or that are not, for some reason, something's gone awry in their heart, whereby, it's a shame Irma's ending, because a few more hits. When we get to that point, then I'll find it more difficult to deal with. But I find in a lot of those situations,
Darren?
My big problem with a lot of things ultimately is just the emotion of guilt, which presumably is a great, good Christian emotion, which we all have. In that,
What do you feel guilty about?
I don't I'm privileged. I'm a white guy from a middle class background. My parents aren't fantastically wealthy, but they're incredibly middle class. You know, they raised me. They raised enough money to send me to private school, and I make a point of never asking them for anything. But I know that if Tim was to get sick of me and get rid of me, then my parents are ultimately there, and I have that, and other people don't. And so my big problem is it's just a logic problem. I believe in so much of what the Bible says, in this kind of as a book to live your life by, as a set of rules to how you would like to be treated and how you want to treat others. I completely get that. But what I then cannot justify is the unfairness of the world. I mean, absolutely everyone was affected by that picture of Aylan Kurdi, 3-year-old kid who was exactly the same age as my youngest, okay? Now, why on that morning was I driving Josh to nursery and was a dead 3-year-old washing up on a beach in Greece? And it's that logic that, for some reason, I can't get past. I completely understand how other people can get past it, but for some reason I can't. Well, we did the Hurricane Irma stuff is interesting because about a week after Hurricane Irma, I got a load of guests on the radio about trying to rebuild St. Martin, which is one of the Caribbean islands that was mostly affected. And one of the guys I was trying to get on was a pastor who was staying at a posh hotel on St. Martin for his 25th wedding anniversary. And so as part of my research, I went and had a look. He runs a big Baptist church in, I think it's Virginia. And so all his sermons are online. And so he did this. And so I watched his sermon that he did when he got back.
Gosh, I wish you're on my team. The research he does is quite incredible.
And
he's good, isn't he?
He said I never fixed him, so it was a complete waste of time. But for the rest of it, he gave this, and he lived, and other people had died. It was kind of a very thankful sermon, and there was lots of sort of good things in it. One of his lines was, I saw God at work because only 11 people died, and that storm was immense, and it only killed 11 people, and the fact that no more died was a sign of God's goodness. And I mean, 11 poor black people died, and a lot of rich white people who could afford to stay in hotels lived. To me, that's not a line you can use. You can't say that and justify and say, this is an example of God's work, without somehow trying to move beyond and explain the bigger picture. There has to be some kind of justification for...
But that's the question. Does there have to be justification? I mean, my husband died at the age of 45, and I've got 3 little boys to raise. I haven't got answers for that. I really haven't. And I think there is so much suffering out there. And I think we know people who have things they're facing, and you can't tell them it's okay or justify their circumstances. Grenfell Tower, horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. And I drove past that tower as it was burning to go to work. Oh, wow. And my driver, BBC driver, knew a family on the 20th floor. And I was saying to him, we were listening to 5 Live, who were trying to cover it live. And I was saying, Louis, it's fine. This is the London. They'll all be behind a cordon. You know, there's no one in that tower. That was my thought. And yet it was just unbelievable. Absolutely awful story. But I've experienced a peace and a closeness to God that I can't explain, despite the circumstances and the realness of God. And I think sometimes you cannot explain or say it's fair or say it's all right. Jesus being crucified on the cross was not fair or justified or logical or anything. It was just what happened in order for us to have this access to God, you know, this incredible one-to-one access. We are running out of time, which is a real shame. Let's get another question really quickly. There's loads.
I mean, I was just going to, had second hand up, but I was just going to say, it's just interesting hearing Darren talking about watching these videos, because I heard the program, the Digital Human, and I've heard another program since about the business of watching, you know, gruesome videos. It was called the Sin Eaters, people who have to do this day in and day out to, you know, content moderation. And I was just kind of partly, one of the points was made was, you know, there needs to be more support for people doing this kind of work, and because it's clearly it's difficult. I don't really have a question from that, so there's other people with questions.
Okay, pass on the mic. Thank you for sharing.
Hi, I'm from an organisation called MAF. We fly into very remote communities. Sally, you mentioned that there are some great Christian organisations out there doing great work, and how much of it is very, very highly sensitive. But what could you say to those of us who have really great good news stories and are trying to kind of permeate into the media to say good things are happening out there? I remember working on a news desk for a charity when the week where there was Manchester and then there was the attacks in Borough Market, and speaking to a couple of journalists that said, we just want some good news to print and to speak about. So that gave me real hope. But, you know, how can you say from your side of the fence, how do we break in? How do we whet the appetite of journalists with good news?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult one, and Helen and Darren can give their perspective as well. Just really quickly, I would say that it's quite hard to get your story across because the appetite isn't there for good news as a rule. Martin Lewis had a campaign, I don't know if you remember, many years ago for good news stories, and he was pretty much belittled by the media industry for that. I think he's a Christian, I'm not sure. That's irrelevant in a way, but he was pushing for more good news stories. It's really difficult. I think you've got to hope for people like me and other people who want to do that and go in that direction. You get a lot more of that stuff in local radio and telly, I think. I love watching local radio and telly because you get some really great proper personal stories. But I've seen some amazing stories as well on BBC World News. Really quickly, Lise Doucette, who's our international correspondent, she's an amazing journalist, a lovely woman as well. She covers all the awful stuff in Syria and all these places. Anyway, she has been to Syria loads. And she was in Canada. She's actually Canadian because she was talking about the fact that Canada has taken in loads of Syrian refugees. And there was a big event going on there to celebrate that. And she ran into, by accident, and she had the film crew with her, 2 women who were in their late teens, who were Syrian girls who emigrated to Canada. And she first met them in Damascus, and they were like 5 and 7, and they were emaciated and skinny and drinking boiled grass and all this kind of stuff. And she met them like 5 years later, looking just like us, looking absolutely fabulous in Canada. And this report was brilliant of them hugging and crying, Lise hugging them, crying, and then welcoming each other. And there's just stories like that. And when you see them as a viewer, isn't it great? Doesn't it do us good? So in terms of how to do it, I just think keep plugging away, don't give up, persevere, just keep sending your stories, press releases to the various news rooms. Local radio is more likely to pick it up, local telly, than international, because our agenda is so huge and you won't get in our hour or 10 minutes or whatever we've got. But just persevere, don't give up, and sell your story as best you can. And hopefully people like me in the newsrooms will go for it.
And the one thing I'd say from a Five Live perspective, it's absolutely about your pitch. Now, the real difficult thing of covering, you say you go to sort of remote places, you've got to make, Joe in Portsmouth is quite a regular texter to Five Live. He's quite angry about a lot of things. You've got to make...
He's not here, is he? No?
But you've got to make Joe care. So for me to put it on the radio, I've got to make Joe want to care about it. I mean, the bomb blast in Mogadishu the other day, it got very little pickup. It got very little pickup because actually it's really difficult to explain quite a lot of history about Somalia, about why these attacks happen a lot, and actually why it should make any difference to Joe's life. So it's about the pitch, it's about somebody's personal story, and if you can make it about somebody's personal story that somehow you can, get into Joe's heart, which is difficult to do with Joe. But you might be able, if you can find that way in, then programs like mine could well take it, because those personal stories, in today's world when there is so much out there and so much kind of chin stroking about Brexit and all those kind of stuff, the stuff that does actually break through is individual people's stories. That works, and there is a massive appetite for that. It's just, if you're going into Somalia, you've got to find a way to sell Somalia to somebody in Birmingham.
I'd just add, I think there's a real appetite for that now.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you could start your own thing online, just a little post, this is good news, this is what's happening, because I meet lots of people that are like, I don't listen to the news no more, Dave. Can't deal with it. Just want good news.
It's too depressing. Absolutely. Look, we're out of time, which is a real shame. In fact, we've gone over, which is, in my industry, is an absolute sin. So, Paul, do you want to come back? Because we'll derail your whole day if we hog any more time, I'm aware. Can I just thank our panellists for being really open, honest, and frank? So Helen, Darren, David, and me.